All right. Yes. You're welcome again to the session. And I've recorded a couple of sessions on people who ask questions. Okay, what does it mean to buy green? We've been talking about buying green since like forever. So what's it all about? There are a couple of YouTube videos that I've recorded on that. I would also be recording this because one of the things I picked is that seasons move, seasons are in transit. And for people who have known me for a while, for almost a year thereabouts, you will have heard me say buy grains. But I believe that we're moving from that point of focusing on buying grains to what the next thing is. And I think it's just right that that information be updated so that people get to know what to do. Now, what are you supposed to do? And this is where it gets really, really interesting. Now, I'm going to let you in on how the whole process of buying grains started and what you're supposed to do and how to follow the patterns. One of the things you need to understand is that there is nothing new under the sun. Everything happens in patterns. This is not the first time there's going to be a famine in the world. There have been famine almost more than 10 times recorded in history. Now, because some of us are believers, we go through the histories and the scriptures and begin to see some patterns that have shown. So for example, during the time of Abraham, there was famine. God gave him an instruction. During the time of Isaac, there was a famine. God gave him an instruction. During the time of Jacob, there was a famine. God gave him instructions. Now, it's important to also note the patterns of the instructions that have been given to these people. For example, Abraham was a sojourner. God was moving him to a land. And so everything he needed to do had to do with transition. It's important to know that. We might not be in that phase as a body where we're in transition anymore, because many of the things that has been foretold have been fulfilled. But don't let me get ahead of myself. Now, during the time of Isaac, Isaac was a settler. So God told him, stay in that land and prosper. It's important to also know the phase of life you're in, whether you're in the settling phase. Now, during the time of Jacob, he wasn't told to settle, he was told to move. I remember in the book of Genesis, verse chapter 46, Jacob was hesitant to move to Egypt. He had to get the revelation by an angel about the Spirit of the Lord telling him it is okay to go. So if you find yourself in the center of the will of God, and that is what you're doing, before you make certain destiny altering decisions like Japa or moving or changing jobs or what have you, it's important that you have some sort of revelation. You pray to God, you ask God, and then you get revelation of what you're supposed to do. Okay, so that was what happened with Jacob. Now, many of the patterns of this famine were given to individuals. Now, because the church is no longer an individual, the church is a body. It's now important to find out when it comes to famine affecting a body, how we're supposed to do it. Now, the ultimate example, in the sense that it's the prime example when something of that sort happened. And so that gives us a pattern of codes of how some of these things can be adjusted. It was with Joseph in the scriptures. Now, when Pharaoh in Egypt had dreams, and then the interpretation of the dream was that there was going to be time of abundance and there was supposed to be times of famine. There is a way to position yourself and your finances and your family in the time of abundance. There's a different way to position your finances and your family in the time of famine. It will be very silly of you to begin to continue to position yourself the way you did in the time of abundance when we have entered the time of famine. At that point, you will no longer be obeying God, you'll be acting in disobedience and rebellion. Because when seasons change, instructions change, directions change. Okay, so that is very important. So you cannot say, oh, God gave me a word 10 years ago, and that's the word I'm still following. The only circumstance that you can still continue to follow that word is if you were still in that season that God gave you the word. If the seasons have changed, then it's important you find a word that would guide you through that season. I said it intentionally because there are many people who are still taking off like a tornado, upon yester words. They're not seeking God to hear the word for them now. So let's just break all of this down. What's all this buy grain all about? And what is the next phase? And what are we supposed to do? So that I wouldn't spend too much time on it, I wrote a couple of things down just so that I can be in line, and I don't waste much of your time. I'll just try to go straight to the point, and then you can begin to meditate on this much later. Now, the very first, buying grain is not the very first thing. People who choose to buy grains, and if the first time they're hearing about grains, is possibly because they have missed 2 seasons of the grains. Okay. Now, what is the first season at the beginning? The first season is to gather grain. That means that you have to do the work to build your own resources and your own economy through investment instruments, saving instruments, reproductive and multiplication instruments. That is gathering grain. And this is usually done when you're in the season of abundance. That's when you gather grain. Now, the second phase after gathering grain is storing grain. Okay? Now, how do you store grain? And this is very important. You do not store grain in your house. Remember, I'm talking about how this affects a body and not an individual. Now, you do not store grain in the house. Storing grain in the house is called subsistence. That's not what we're looking for. That cannot save the people. Now, where you store grain is you store grain under authority, meaning that there must be some sort of political influence that gives you authority to store. What that means is that the political system guarantees that the grains will continue to be in good condition. What that means is that you delegate the storage of those grains to political authority. So that is how grains are stored. Now, at that position of political authority, one of the things you become is you become custodian. You have the office of a custodian. So you become a custodian of the grain. That means that you get to more like a thought leader, more like an expert, more like an administrator of those grains. So you bring up strategies, systems, structures, on how that will be preserved. But you will not be the one to do it. You delegate that to the state. You delegate that to political authority. Delegate that to family authority. Whatever the case is, it just has to be an authority system. Now, when you have done that in the years of abundance, you keep storing it until you can't count anymore. Okay. So if you are a nation and you're looking at your national reserve or your foreign reserve and you're not storing up reserve, you are not positioning yourself for the years of famine. If you are a person and you're not storing up reserve through investments, savings, assets, you're not preparing yourself for the years of famine. Okay. Now, let's go on. Now, if you look through the line of Joseph and the strategies he did, this is very important, and that's where we're going. What was the first thing he did in the years of abundance? He collected all the food, then he stored all the grains in abundance. Those are the 2 important things to do. Store up grains, collect all the food, and then store it. Now, what you leverage on is people. You give instruction. That's where that political authority is important. That authority of the state that compels people to bring storage, just for protection. Now, once you have all of that, and then the years of famine comes, and you begin to see that things begin to decline, that's when you know that famine is coming. What you do then is you open the storehouse so that people can buy grain. So the very first time you heard me say buy grain, it's a sign that famine is already at the door. And in order to buy grain, you buy grain with money. Now, it's important to know who you are in this dynamics. In a time of famine, some people would remain that political authority figure, while others will become the masses. What you have and what you give will determine where you are. Okay. So those who are at the helms of affairs, who understand and operate the governance of that systems and structures, will give grain. Those who are the masses will give money. So there's a transfer of grain for money. What that means is that essentially the state begins to have more money and then selling it for grains. As a nation, the goal of the prosperity of a nation is not about the amount of money it has. It's about the amount of reserve it has. So that's very important. And I just need to put that out there. So the other thing here, which is quite significant, and I would not want you to take it the wrong way. Now, the moment you see that you have become someone who uses money to get grain, that means you are in a very precarious position and you need to make certain quick decisions to change that. Now, there is a singular decision to make that can be broken into two options. Now, what are the options? Number one, understand this, that this option must come by revelation, not by just looking at the fact and being scared, giving into despair and all of that. No. Okay. The option is move to a sustainable land. The same way Jacob had to move from Israel, from where they were, to Egypt during the time of the famine by revelation. Okay, so now here's the thing. If you do not have what it takes to move to a sustainable land, by all means, the last option you have is to move to a sustainable economy. If you cannot move to a sustainable land, please move to a sustainable economy. What that means is that you might still be in the unsustainable land, but it will be a thing of woe for you to be in an unsustainable land, suffering in an unsustainable economy. So, for example, if you are in Nigeria and you did not have the instruction or revelation or the wherewithal to move to a better land that is more sustainable and has a better economy, what you can do for yourself is, while you are in that unsustainable land, make sure that the currency of your trade is that of the sustained economy. I hope you understand. So maybe you're going for remote work, or you earn in foreign currencies, or you find ways to invest in foreign currencies. That is a way to trap a sustainable economy, even while you still find yourself in an unsustained land. Okay, so that is the first thing you need to understand in the time of famine. So when people begin to buy grain, and you see that you're beginning to lose money to have the grains, you have to make a switch in land or a switch in economy. I don't want to overplay that. I think you already get that. So what's going to be the next phase? The next phase is going to be a time when the land grows weak. There is a decline in the productivity of the land. The famine begins to bite harder. How do you know famine bites harder? For example, there's going to be a reduction in GDP. There's going to be a reduction in exports. Quotient. The amount of money you make would reduce. Your purchasing power begins to reduce. You will find out that the amount of money you used to save after your expenses in a month is now reduced. These are signs that you are experiencing a decline, and you need to make intentional actions at that point. Now, that is the point when food is reducing and you're getting to the point where there is no food, nothing to sustain you, nothing to give you that succor. And so you need to understand how the movement of trade is actually going to help you. Now, what did Joseph do? Because we have to align ourselves with Joseph, because as he prospered, not align ourselves with the people who suffered. Okay, do you want to prosper or do you want to suffer? The choice is yours that you have to take. All right. So when you get to the point where there's no food, the land begins to grow weak, and there's an economic decline, that is not the time to pray. I need you to understand it. That is not the time to pray. Now, you can pray, but that is not the time to pray for a turnaround in the economy. Especially if it is a famine. A famine is a natural event that has a window, especially if it's a prophetic thing that has been told long before. It is not for you to pray against, it is for you to reposition yourself and be strategic. All right. So what you do there, now remember, we align ourselves with Joseph because we want to prosper, we don't want to suffer. Now, the people who prospered, what did they do? And let us learn from them. So Joseph began to give grains to take the money from the people. Okay, so he began to gather the money, and this is where a lot of people don't understand. He didn't just gather the money for gathering's sake. He gathered the money. Please read the scripture if you can. He gathered the money and created a treasury system. That is what saves the money. If you don't know how to create a treasury system with the money you are getting, you're going to lose that money. So someone who is in the position of Joseph, for example, has skills, product, expertise that people need in a time of famine, and then people are willing to pay for. Now, the money you get during a time of famine is not meant to be spent. The money gotten during the time of famine is meant to be structured by creating a treasury system around it. If you don't know how a treasury system is created, use GPT or use Google to have understanding of that. Okay, I don't want to go into all of that for now. So you gather the money and you create a treasury system. Now, there will come a time that people continue to give money and their money continues to deplete. But after a time, there will be no more money, meaning that there is no more inflow into your treasury system. What do you do after that? What do the people have? They don't have food, they don't have money, but you still have grain. So what do they need? What do they have that I can get? Now that is when they have livestock. They have, and this livestock metaphorically means investments structures. So maybe they have houses, they have assets, they have gold, and all of those kind of things. That is when you create a new trade system that takes their livestock, but stock. Okay, now when you hear the term livestock, and in the financial system, it is a living thing that is an investment instrument. So, for example, if you are someone in the investment and money market, you hear things like, "Oh, I bought the stocks of this company." A company is a business entity that is expected to create profit, but a livestock is a living entity that is expected to create, profit. So, livestock would mean people's businesses, people's investments, people's creative ideas, intellectual properties. Those are the things you begin to barter, for grains that people still need. Remember, in order to do this, you need to have gotten to that level of governmentality, and which are some of the things I've shared at the range. So people don't have money, you take their livestock and you exchange it for food. Okay. Now, after a season has passed and people do not have livestock anymore, they do not have businesses anymore because you've bought everything over, what are you supposed to do? Then you begin to buy their fields and their lands. And then you give them taxed food, taxed seed, meaning that, okay, because your even your reserve is already getting depleted, you have to create a way to replete it is to task whatever comes out of it. Meaning that I'm giving you this, but you must give me back something when you use this. I'm talking of these things in skeletal forms. I believe in your wisdom and creativity in order to be able to create something genuine, out of these things I'm talking about. Okay, so that is usually the pattern, and series and progressions of how things are expected to go during a time of famine. So let's circle it back. We're currently in the point, or we have just passed the season where you could or you should have bought grains. Now, if you did not buy grain, what are you supposed to do now? What you're supposed to do now is to be intentional about your economy. That is sustainable land, sustainable economy. If you cannot leave an unsustainable land, please, by all means, create a sustainable economy. Okay, and that is how the only way, for now, or let me just say one of the ways for now that you can thrive even when this famine begins to bite. And what is the conclusion of this matter? How do you create a sustainable economy? I've been talking about building personal economies for a while. One of the ways to understand this, if you go through the Arab system or the Jewish economy, how they build an economy around people of common interest, common ethnicity, in order to grow their money. I think it would be important for you to learn that there is an old book called The Jewish Phenomenon. You can give that a read, and that helps you to understand how to build a personal economy. You can find yourself in a land that is suffering, but if you can pull together people who are productive and who have some sort of alliance building an economy, then you can thrive. Now, another way is, for example, if you have a family or a friend and someone who has moved to a sustainable land or operates under a sustainable economy, you can leverage on that person to help you, while you find yourself in an unsustainable land or unsustainable economy. But being beggarly is the last resort. You have to think. This is the time to pray, but not just end it with prayer. Sit down, think. Read about how economies are formed. Read about how treasury systems are built. read about personal economy and how you can create that. Another way for personal economy is just personal banks. So one of the things you need to think about is how is the banking structure built? How can the banking structure be built? But how can you build a banking structure now that is not on fiat, that is not on money, but a banking system that is on grain, right? I'm not going to be saying more than that for now. When it comes to building a banking structure for grain, without for the premium Lamad Africa community members, that's where we get to talk more high level stuff. But I really do not want this to take much time, and so this is where I'm going to be ending the session. Prayerfully consider what I've said, meditate upon it, and create solutions from it. And then probably the next time we might be speaking, it wouldn't be a situation of buying grains anymore. It's building an economy with your grain. God bless you, and may you continue to prosper.